On this episode, I bring in a constant repeat guest. I really love this guy, Steve at Verblio, and we talk about the opportunities agencies have. And one strategy that I've never thought about for really growing your marketing. And it's really pretty cool. I really think you'll like this episode, and let's get into it. Hey, Steve, welcome to the show.
Jason, it's great to be back.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you on. You might as well just be my co-host the times we have you on. For the people that haven't seen any of the other shows or listened to the other shows before, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Great. I'm Steve Pockross. I'm the CEO of Verblio. We are a content creation marketplace with 3,000 writers creating 70,000 pieces of unique content every year, very focused on delivering for digital agencies like your audience.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and jump into it, and let's talk about kind of the trends that you're seeing with agencies actually creating content. Because I think you were telling me, or maybe Paul was telling me, you guys have worked with or seen 500 plus agencies working with in the content, helping them create the amazing content. So, what are some of the trends that you guys are actually seeing?
We do have a unique courtside view of what agencies are doing live. So I say that I am a good observer of what the best marketers do as opposed to being the best marketer out there. So that's what I'm reporting back. So we've seen some interesting trends. I think last time we talked was right at the beginning of the pandemic and the crisis, and we we're all trying to figure out what trends would come next. And so I can report on a few of those now. So at the beginning, last time we talked about big trends was kind of early in the year. We were talking about long form, the massive it just keeps accelerating the focus of 1,000 words plus 2,000 words versus where it was before, moving into video and a couple other forms. What's really happened since in the pandemic is a couple things. So one is a big move towards more immediate impact content. And so we all know that content is king in the most effective marketing channel out there, but waiting 6 months and selling a 6-month project, especially if you're an agency with a client who's desperate, is a really hard sell. And so the type of product we found ourselves doing, getting requests for first, a lot of content refreshes, written content that's already been successful that you want to really rank higher. Companies with 30 blogs, companies with 1,000 out of their 5,000 that they want to repurpose. The second is repurposing content into multi-channel. And this has been a big trend, taking audio, turning it into written content, moving the other way around. We've gotten a lot of conferences that send us every video to turn into blog posts so that they can just have a multi-pronged approach to meeting their audience where they are and taking advantage of every channel without duplicating efforts. And the third is the microcontent trend, which I know that you're a big advocate of, which is turning every one of these pieces into smaller pieces. Every ebook should be 100 blogs. Every podcast can be 1 to 5, even more types of written pieces, and then your 10 podcasts can turn into an ebook. So we keep seeing this in every possible direction, and those are some of the biggest trends. The last trend I'll say after that is that companies are going a lot bigger. The bigger agencies are doing a lot more content than ever before. So we've seen about a 25% increase in the request for content since April.
Do you see more and more agencies starting to do a podcast? And the reason why I ask is, I was in New York doing a keynote. Was this about this time last year? Yeah. And I remember in front of 800 agencies, I was like, how many of you have podcasts? And literally there was like 5 or 6 people that raised their hand, and I was shocked.
Yeah, right? I was in the audience with Paul at the time, and we looked at each other and said, we should do a podcast.
Yeah, it's crazy. So are you seeing more and more agencies starting to do podcasts, and where's that going?
So we're seeing a lot more requests for podcasts turning into written content in a variety of ways, actually, which I think we can talk about later, the different ways you can do that. I think there is a big proliferation of content or of podcasts across agencies, just like there are in every industry. I don't have exact numbers. The craziest thing about the podcast world is how few numbers there are for me to follow and to figure out what's good and where the activity is occurring. I think we're going to get better at that. I think the main message is that there's still so much space out there. You were telling everyone to do it before. I think the stats I've heard is there might be 800,000 podcasts out there, but there are billions of websites. So you might feel like it's saturated, but you can still find your own market, especially if you find your unique take on guests and aren't just recycling the same questions and guests as everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, like, I look at podcasting and going, every month, it's like people more full than a football stadium listening to us. Like, and I have their attention for 20 minutes. Like, that blows my mind versus, any of the other kind of type of content like video or website, like attention span is like this. So in talking about like podcasting, what have you seen being unique, or like what have you seen been working for people that have a podcast or are about to do a podcast where they can actually take that further? Because, for many, many years, I used to just be like, I'll record the podcast, put it out there. I'm like, good, like that's it.
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting question. You had a guest on, I can't remember his name, but he was a specialist in radio talking about just the benefits of podcasting and why it resonates so much, which really stuck with me, which I hadn't really thought of, which is like, it's a DVR for audio that you can play whenever you're most available. When you're available for it, you can listen to as much as you want. You can get 5 minutes of it and it just goes away. And it's so accessible. The second piece that he talked about was how it's like listening in on a talk show, but only to the best parts, which is, I listen to way too much sports radio and I'm just shocked at how awful most of it is. And if I could just get to the highlight period, I'd be thrilled. So anyway, that's what I'm trying to do with my podcast, which is, so first of all, I think there's the intention of the podcast. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to create? So we created our own podcast. You are our very first guest back in March, right after the crisis began, to help agencies and digital marketers with how to respond to the crisis. And then we use that as an impetus. We were doing 3 times a week to actually create the full podcast, which we now do, which is called the Verblio Show, which we now do once a week. And so
how did you come up with that name?
There was a bizarre amount of debate to come up with such a simple name. Yeah, I have a funny story about a rebranding project that I won't get it on tangent now, where we ended up, after spending a consultant millions and millions of dollars, just putting "the" in front of our name. So the second piece of the podcast is, I think that it has a natural viral aspect to it. So partnerships, so my background is a lot of strategic partnerships and business development before I came to CEO. And all of partnerships was like, how do we have an initial step together? Well, first we write a guest post. And then we send it to our list, which very few people read, but at least we do something. And we put your name on our partnership page, which nobody goes to. And then if things are going really well, and like we prove to the marketing team, we'll send an email to both of our lists and maybe we'll get some response. But a podcast is much more interactive. It brings your personality forward. It's much more engaging. And it's basically 100 times better than the original partnership approach. Because the other piece is, then you share it with both of your audiences. You have the names, you have a title, you have some really engaging piece of content for you. And then your audience naturally multiplies. They'll listen to your podcast, they'll listen to my podcast in ways that I just hadn't really understood before. So I think that's one of the big benefits we found.
Awesome. Well, you guys are doing some really interesting things around kind of turning your podcast and really kind of taking it on a written form. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We are. So we've been trying to productize what we've seen working with other marketers. So one of the strategies we have is, great marketers come to us, tell us how they would like to use us better than what we're currently doing. And then we try to listen to them and turn it into a product and share it out with all the marketers to take advantage of best practices. So you've been doing show notes with us for a long time and summarizing them, which we deeply appreciate. And then we have basically found kind of 2 other themes of requests. So one is like a more full blog post, 1,200, 1,500 words, which is more of a thought leadership piece. It'll capture quotes, best quotes from the article. Here are the big themes, and it'll be much more of an SEO-driven piece that can be shared kind of across the web. And so with the benefits of that, we saw our clients doing it, and then we started to do it ourselves. There are a few benefits. One is for yourself. There's the SEO kind of natural content point. The second is, if you're a podcast host, you can send it to your guests. This can be something that you're offering as is, this is why you want to be on my show, but also if they post it on their site, it links back to you more directly, and you're kind of making it easy for them and giving them a piece of value. And the third is that very few people, while podcasts might be more engaging than other channels, there's still people who love to read. I would still rather read. And you can appeal to a much bigger audience in a more, how do I say it? Just a more complete way. You want them to get all the content out of it versus driving them to the podcast. So that's kind of the second way. Show notes, one like larger thought leadership piece summary. And the third, I think, is really interesting. I have a bunch of thought leaders that are coming to Verblio now that are requesting a series of blogs. So every podcast doesn't just have to be one summary. We're going to cover a lot of topics. I'm going to take this back to my favorite Verblio writers and say, I want you to turn this into 5 different posts. And what I plan to do is that I've been on, a bunch of shows this year, as I'm sure you have as well, is to summarize these and make that content easy. This will be my ebook coming out soon of kind of like trends of 2020. I think that's a really interesting trend.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought about using it for other shows that you've been on. Like I've always thought about, using it for, your particular show and then writing that blog post. Cause I like having, those show notes where I have a destination for someone to go that I can control. Right. So if I'm just sending people to iTunes or Stitcher or SoundCloud or wherever, I don't control what's in that environment. But if I can send them to, jasonswank.com/ whatever the episode is, I can control what's on the right. I can control what's on the left. I can remark it if I need to and write everything central there. I can put video there or whatever it is. But I never thought about, which is very clever because I know a lot of people have built their businesses. Like one of our friends, Aaron Walker, he always talks about building his business by getting on other people's show. And he did that for many years before he even created his show. And that's a sneaky and clever way. Hopefully you guys pick up on that and you guys go do that, because I think that's kind of brilliant.
Thank you. We're working on it quickly.
What other I mean, I guess you can do this with other things, right? Like you can do this with your speaking engagements.
You can with everything. So this is kind of one of the big trends, back to kind of like the big 3, is like as an agency owner, as an agency leader, or any direct like thought leadership kind of position, it's really hard to create that content consistently while doing your day job. There's just so much going on. I always say that, I run a content creation company. My own personal content's a top 5 goal of mine every year, and every given day, it's like number 30 to 50. Like, how do you make it happen? Which is why kind of something that we keep in mind and try to make happen. And so, so with that, think of we basically what I've been learning about myself and others is to find your existing content out there. You probably already created all this great thought leadership. You created videos. You've been on stage. You were on all these podcasts. So instead of recreating the wheel where you go back and sit in front of the dreaded blank cursor, which for me is like my own personal nightmare. That's what I wake up to at night, is the blank cursor on the screen. I have my writers watch those videos, watch those conferences, create a draft for me. Here's the outline that I proposed for you, and then I work off of that from there. And some of us write well, some of us talk well, and some of us present well. And I think it's good for every leader to know which one's best for you, and then seek the help to get to the other formats.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love that, we all have all this content that we've created that other people you can help leverage, and other people can help you leverage that, and you can create stuff on a consistent basis, which a lot of people just think, yeah, the blank cursor, or they turn on the camera and they go, what do I talk about? Like, it's just like, you get, a lot of times when I first turn on the camera, I'm like, you get anxiety and you're like, oh, what? Like what? and then like you go running, and then while you're running, you're like, I get this brilliant idea. And then I'm like, I try to run faster and get back before I forget it. And then like you jump in the showers because you can't do the video all sweaty. And then you're like, crap, I forgot it. Like, it's all there.
No, it's exactly right. And I think one of my favorite parts of the process, so I have a deep respect for writers. you've heard the story. My mother's a writer, my wife's a writer, my brother's a professional writer, and I'm not, but I run the writing company. And so their skill set of being able, it's so much more than just getting words on paper, which is, I think, how most people think of a writer. It's structuring thought, figuring out what the themes, the stories are that are interesting. So one of my favorite parts of this process is having my writer listen to my podcast interview and then tell me what was interesting and what's new in the theme, because I would have never picked out the same thing.
Yeah. What mistakes are executives making when they're working on their own content? Just because all executives, I feel, that need to be, that leader, right? Or that thought leader in their industry. So what are some mistakes that they're making?
I think part of the mistake is that great content, there's a common quote that great content is assembled more than it's written. And so it's part of a team endeavor. And I think that most thought leaders believe that in order to create that great content, it is a matter of sitting down and taking your genius, everything has to be that high level, and turning it into the written word. So it basically flows from your head onto the page. And I think what really happens is there's a few things. One is, in order to do content consistently and to get it across, you have to have an expectation setting process of what level of your own voice do you want to have in it. So if you believe everything has to be exactly your voice, there's ways to do it, and there's kind of the level of this is pretty close to what I'd like. The second is, like, you have to commit to the process, which is, if you're going to, I highly recommend, if you're not a natural writer, that you find writers to help you. You're always going to know your own voice and your own subject matter better than any writer. You're talking to a journalist here. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes is not putting forth enough of your own structure and what you would like to see, and giving that to the writer to create. I think there's something about the writing process where there's a belief that telepathy exists, where there's just going to be a download from your mind to theirs. And content creation's messy. Even when you're getting a ton of help and somebody's helping you along the way, you have to prepare them, interact with them, and respond and give feedback in order for you to get your voice out. But if you put that in, especially if you put it into a platform where it's recording all of that, you can find a consistent voice of writers and commit to the process. So I'm saying that in order to do it by yourself is going to be too hard, because it's going to take way too much time. You're going to run into that like number 30 priority issue. But if you can take out 80% of the process, and so you're only doing the 20% working with a writer, set your expectation right. You're still going to be doing that 20%, but it's going to be worth it, and it's much less than you would do otherwise.
I love it. I love it. This has all been great, Steve. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you think would benefit the audience?
I think so. I think one of the other processes for getting thought leadership, we've talked so much about the executives of companies, is to talk about how do you get thought leadership out of the rest of your company. And I think this is an untapped resource, especially with, the most competitive space out there is every agency owner trying to create new space for themselves and differentiate themselves. So what if it was your operations team that was writing? What if it was the lead of client services, or even your head engineer? How do you create a process for them to download it? And so I think one is to think bigger. Those are much less talked about and will probably have more access. If your client services people are talking to someone, your target client services people, it's going to really help you. And so your key is, how do you create the questions to send to them and make the process really easy, and then help them promote it afterwards. And so we're recommending, come up with your list of 5 questions to ask each one of your thought leaders in the company on a rotating basis. Get them to record it, voice or video, send it to a writer, and have them write it up for you. And then I think you're going to have there's so much more content. Everyone's thinking about, how do I score for SEO versus how do I add value? And that's one way to do it.
Yeah, that's one thing we've always been bad at, is on SEO. Because when we're creating content, we're just like, we're going to create amazing content that actually helps. And it's not, we don't care about the rankings, even though we do, that's secondary. And that's why I say we struggle with that. SEO companies help. But I do like, and I do tell people a lot of times that if you have a show, a video, a podcast, or the written blog, obviously I'm horrible at writing, so I'm like you, Steve. Like, I'm not like the rest of your family at good at writing. So, I always liked, video and podcasting, and I always tell people, I'm like, have your team participate in those, right? Just like you were saying, so they can understand it, and you almost kind of build a character in a story that people are seeing. It's kind of like, if anybody's ever watched The Office, it's like we know all those characters and we know, right? And you
Yeah,
can create the same thing within your agency where people know, because a lot of times when people just do the podcast as the owner, they want to always talk with the owner and they highlight that. But, if you can highlight your COO or your, like Steve, you were bragging about, a couple of your team members, right? Like, if you can highlight them, then people are like, oh, that's cool, right? Like, it's not a one-man show.
I agree. Yeah, you're making me realize I have to do it even more. I need to have my team on the podcast too, not just on the blog. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Well, awesome. Well, what's the website people can go and check you guys out? Because you guys always hook our listener up with a really cool deal.
So we're at www.verblio.com. I'll get the exact link to the coupon deal in the show notes for sure. And then you can find us at the Verblio Show if you're looking for any major podcast. And you can always find me online at Steve Pockross.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. You guys make sure you go to our show notes and get that special deal with Verblio. We've been using them for many, many years. Highly recommend them. And until next time, have a swank day.